So if you're comfortable to, we love seeing people's faces. So please leave your cameras on if you feel comfortable doing that. But obviously remain muted unless you actually want to ask a question. And just a heads up that we will be taking some screenshots which we may share on social media. So if you're not comfortable with that, feel free to not show your face, or for any other reason, Jamie. That's absolutely fine. So just a little bit about World IA Day. You might not have heard of it. You might not know why we have a World IA Day. So it's an initiative of the World Information Architecture Association, whose mission is to build and connect a global community of IA advocates and practitioners, to promote the role of information architecture in different fields, to provide resources for learning and professional development, and to engage IE academics and professionals in research and development. So World IA Day is one of the key initiatives of the association. And this year we have events in 32 locations across 17 countries on 5 continents. So you can see us there. You can see us there in the bottom right corner, and the world feels a little bit more filled in when there's something going on in Australia, doesn't there? So we're really happy to be doing this. World IA Day does have some global sponsors and partners. I'm sure many of them you would have heard of: Rosenfeld, Optimal Workshop, World Usability Day, the Information Architecture Conference, which is a fantastic conference. It's running, I think, April in Seattle. If you have a chance to book a last-minute trip to Seattle for that conference, I would highly recommend it. Rutgers and DIA Design Guild. Now, some of the sponsors have actually offered some discounts and other giveaways to anyone attending a World IA Day event, which includes you. So if you'd like to find out what's on offer, you can either scan that QR code or go to that URL, forms.worldiad.org/WIAD24-gifts. Not the most memorable URL in the world. But I'll give you a minute to jot that down, and I'll also put this slide up again at the end just in case you miss it. But everybody can get discounts on Rosenfeld Media books, various community and conference discounts, and there's also going to be some giveaways by Rosenfeld and also Optimal Workshop. So anyone need more time to write down that URL? As I say, I'll return to it at the end. So I'll move on because I'm really excited and happy to have our speaker, Mags Hanley, here to talk about the politics of navigation. I don't feel like Mags needs a lot of introduction to people in Australia. She's one of the most experienced information architects and UX practitioners in Australia. She's worked for and with all kinds of organizations to sort of deal with complex information architecture and user experience problems. And she's also really well known as someone who's interested in careers of people working in user experience and related fields. So career coaching is one of the things that she does. And she's also spoken to us before about career architecture, which is basically the idea of applying information architecture principles to one's own career as a designer or someone working in sort of related fields. So so Mags has a lot of strings to her bow, but one thing that she is very, very, very experienced in is in working through nutty kind of information architecture projects, and particularly what she's going to talk to us today about is dealing with the politics that inevitably come up in organizations when we start talking about and trying to change an organization's navigation. So without further ado, I will stop sharing and hand over to Mags. Feel free to ask questions in the chat as we go. We will have time for questions and discussion at the end. I'll hand it off to Mags.
Thank you, Angus, and thank you to all for joining us today. I actually wanted to start straight away with an exercise. So I want you all to get your pen and pencil together. This is JB Hi-Fi's navigation from 2017, and this is a piece of work that I worked on in 2017. What I'd like you to do is, looking at this is cameras. I'd like you to identify 3 things that you think is wrong with this navigation. Don't think about it as the design aspect of it. Think about it as the labeling and IA structure of it, as opposed to the design, because the design was awful as well. Once you've got 3 things, pop them into chat for me. So I can see factory scoop, brand logos, categories that don't make sense, arrows and drop downs, no hierarchy, unrelated labels like drones. Too many categories. Oh, actually, I'm going to say too few categories. Too many top level nav. Oh, don't worry about that one. That one, we continued having that number. Binoculars aren't cameras. What's under the twisties? Are there any hidden content? No, there was no hidden content. So what I want to talk to you about in here is some of the problems that we're coming up with. I'll answer the factory scoop first. Factory scoop was a JB Hi-Fi term for stuff that was on sort of a special order or things that were actually maybe refurbished. So let me start with the things that I'm seeing here. We've got interchangeable lens cameras. The reason I'm asking all of you these, because the majority of these have nothing to do with categories and all to do with politics. Oh, the difference between the carrots between the two? Nothing. It was just a template that EpiServer had. So, interchangeable lens cameras. Technically, that is a right content label. An interchangeable lens camera is what we'd probably call a DSLR or a mirrorless. And it was technically right because you changed the lenses, you're interchangeable. But that was the decision of the guy who was the buyer. And he said, everyone's going to call them these. No one calls them this. As some of you said, drones, robotics, smart home, they're not cameras. Binoculars, they're not cameras. No, they're not. They're there because the guy who was buying the cameras, this is the content he bought from his suppliers. He owned this category, so drones and robotics and smart home turned up in his cameras department. We have cameras, accessories, which are in multiple places, though of course we've got the drone accessories, we've got the camera accessories, and we've got the action camera accessories. So someone decided these were important enough to put in that level. And then we have batteries and memories, which are lower level. They're quite deep, as opposed to some of these others, which are more primary categories. Though, honestly, from my perspective, batteries and memory are actually pretty useful as something that people want to find. If you can see that the majority of these have nothing to do with actual classification or what the user wants to talk about or find. It is a political decision, and the whole of JB Hi-Fi was about political decisions based on who was buying. So my next thing I'd like you to do is, in each of these, I'd like you to identify where the speakers are. So speakers as in something that you would have, it would put voice or music into the room. So for each of these ones I'm going to show you are going to have a type of speaker. If you can just note down what they are, and then we'll go through them together. You don't have to pop them into chat. So for TV and home entertainment, identify where your speakers are. Okay, I'm going to go to the next one. iPods, docks, and fitness. Identify where the speakers are. Next one. Headphones and DJ. This is the next one, musical instruments. Okay, let me go through these with you. In TV and home entertainment, we've got wireless audio, speakers, soundbars. I know, Jackie's just said, why are there so many? Yeah. So wireless audio, speakers, and soundbars. You may also find them in audio and visual accessories. Not sure. In iPods, docks, and fitness, wireless speakers and portable audio. And honestly, from my perspective, I'm not really quite sure what the difference is between those two categories. In headphones and DJ, we have PA speakers. But guess what? PA speakers also turn up in musical instruments. And this is political. Because guess what? Each of these different ones, except headphones and DJ and musical instruments, actually were managed by the one buyer. So that's why PA speakers turn up in both. But home entertainment, studio monitors are speakers as well. Thanks, Carrie. Public address systems, possibly. You're right. I'm not sure, it's hard to know sometimes with how big or how small they are. And of course, JB Hi-Fi doesn't really invest in these particular ones as much. Oh, and headphones. Headphones, different one. Headphones, oh my gosh. But each of these, TV and home entertainment, they had these wireless audio speakers in the sound bars because the TV guy owned that area. Then the iPods, docks, and fitness were owned by another group, and they had the wireless speakers and the portable audio, which I said, actually, I don't know what the difference is. Headphones and DJ musical instruments done by the one guy. So PA speakers turn up in both. And there are also speakers in computers and tablets, but no one decided to put them into the navigation. Because when I did that, so as you can see, the user was never thought of in this. Victoria's going, where's the use? There's no users. It was all about the owners of those different groups. And we were very, very much showing our internal silos and how they bought from the products from the suppliers, rather than anything to do with users. And that was the reason I was brought in to do this work. But I thought it would be very good. It's such a bad one, but it's so good because it's so bad. So all of these speakers were placed into their individual buyers categories. And this is the politics aspect. And of course, poorly labelled, lots of crossover. No one was looking at it consistently. So this is the politics of navigation, because as soon as you start to look at how you can change this, politics rears its ugly heads. So I think that there's three different ways, that the cornerstones I have of my IA politics. There is ownership, brand reflection, and status. And this is what we're going to go through together. So my first one is this perceived or actual ownership of the navigation. What can it derail due to their ownership? And what's the power and the influence within the organization? These are the things that we have to understand when we go into working with an organization about their navigation. Sometimes they have it imposed on from on high and say, guess what? You are going to redesign this. And suddenly all the people go, but my bit, my ownership, you're taking away my ownership. I own this one. I own cameras. Therefore, everything that's in there should be cameras. And could it be derailed? And there's an organization I was working with last year. And when we started to talk about putting cross journeys for users across all of those different departments that they had there, someone went, but that you're getting ahead of yourselves. That's my area. Why would you ever put any other content from the other ones? Why would my content live somewhere else? And the aspect then is, what's their power and influence in the organization? I had another one, which was really funny, where they turned and said, everything has to be shallow. There is you cannot put anything, there can't be any layers in the classification, there can't be any layers in the navigation, because this is how it works for mobile, and mobile is where we have the most use. And I'm sitting going, at one point in time, we were talking about mobile first, which meant that we couldn't do anything mobile. We designed just for mobile, and we didn't do anything with the desktop, had to reflect the mobile. And at this time, I want it to be cohesive. Cohesive as opposed to consistent. I wanted to make sure if you move between them, there is a cohesiveness, with the realization that the majority of time we're providing a lot more access onto a desktop content than we are on mobile. But that's where their power and influence comes in, which says, who has the power over this and what difference does this make? So when we think about JB, there was two things. Ownership was really, really big, and then status. And I'll go into more status more differently. But ownership, this is my area. I can do what I want with it. And in particular, and some of you put logo positions in there, I will sell in our contracts a logo position on that navigation. I will then name the sections the way that the buyers say it would be, and display the goods in the way that I buy, even if it's no user thinks about finding that information there. If I take the selling of the logo positions, the interesting thing for me was when I sat there and put all of my clicks on those, there were 2 logos that actually got clicked on in the whole of the navigation. 2. It was Google and it was Apple. No one clicked on any of the rest of it. The other bit was that now I was working in marketing, and marketing was leading this particular project. And we had no idea that brands were buying logo positions. So therefore, any decisions, it was only when I started to talk to some of the buyers themselves, and I said, oh yeah, we sell these positions. It's in their contracts that they have to be there, that I had that moment of, oh, I'm still going to have to put those logo positions in the navigation because I have to honor those particular contracts. And then the last bit in here is this status. So, and this is someone also said, how many groups? Honestly, it wasn't that bad. It was a limitation space, but it was, once we actually redesigned it, I got really, really good click-throughs into adding to basket, which was my measures of success. So yeah, it was okay. But my section being in the top navigation was definitely a status bit. So I'm there, I'm important enough. So let's talk about brand reflection. because a lot of this is about, does it represent the brand? Because it's one of the first things that people see. And if any of you have done any mobile and navigation redesigns, you'll know, of course, the two things that people click on, search and the nav. The actual pages themselves, the landing pages, not particularly well used as category pages. They want to get into content as quickly as possible. And so if those are the top two things, and those are the things that people see on the navigation on desktop, or in however we do a hide and reveal, the bottom bar, these are the things that people see. And so marketing wants it to be a brand reflection. This is the Commonwealth Bank from 2013. Can you see that the top thing we have there is can? I'm a Commonwealth Bank, and even I was, at that time in 2013, I was still living in the UK, and can was the top thing, and I'm just sitting there going, whoa. And it's redesigned it, and you can see what the message is. Australia's #1 banking website is now even better. Simpler and smarter. I can go on holidays. So I had, at the same time as this was happening, I had been working with a retail bank in the UK, and we were talking, and they very much wanted to do this as life event. So this is sort of a life event aspect. So they wanted their navigation to be about that. Yeah, it's internal, in very much internal branding that they want to show. So we have the ownership elements of, here's my area and it's online. And then we've got the aspect of marketing saying our internal branding should be within this most important piece of information, which is the navigation. No one can make can accessible. It's just not accessible because it just doesn't mean anything. And so when I clicked on can, it says I can go on holidays. I love the Internet Archive allowed me to grab all of these, which is wonderful. This would not have worked as the primary navigation. If you can think about this as on a mobile, where can is the first one. Oh my gosh. So when I was doing this work with Santander, we sat there and we actually, so you can see we can start, invest, retire, travel. Those are the 4 life events that they were focusing on. What the heck is start? I don't know what start is. Invest, I'm okay. Retire, sure. Travel. But there's no mortgage in there. People want to find the stuff. And in particular, when we think about banking, and Santander, when we talked about this in banking, we've been taught about financial products from retail banks for the last 20, 30 years. So we look for a mortgage. Jen was saying there, interesting perspective. I can to we can, or I want to. The majority of people, when we were testing this with Santander, did not use, and I did it very explicitly. I ran a number of tests very early on event-based versus brand versus product type. Product type came out so strongly. And so when we think about brand reflection, we're looking at this as a group going, are these brand labels reflecting the way that the marketing team thinks that the brand should be positioned? Are they brand driven, not user driven? And that's a politics aspect, which says the marketing team may actually own the website. Own the website, meaning this is the group that owns the CMS, which manages what's on the site. They're the team that's probably creating all of those pages, as opposed to perhaps teams that are looking at the mortgage. So maybe they're looking after the mortgage aspect of it, or the app. So we're sitting there and saying marketing may own this. So therefore they say we need it to reflect our brand, and can reflects the brand. Another politics for you to focus on. How are you doing that? How are you connecting in with marketing and their brand reflection? because what they're trying to do is, from a sales and marketing perspective, is actually increase the lifetime value of the customer. But also they've probably spent a lot of money on rebranding in this particular way. So let me talk about status. The way I think about value, so how we provide value, or how people think about value, their value to an organization, their value in themselves, is in 4 different ways. Are you making money or are you saving money? Are you saving time? Are you more efficient or effective? Are we talking about happiness? I don't like using NPS, but happiness and satisfaction, happiness of the individual and the team, and culture, or status. Are you a leader in the industry? Are you a leader in the organization? Or are you seen as more valuable and powerful than others? So a lot of the time when we're talking about our OKRs and KPIs and maybe key pillars that the organization is looking for, we're probably looking at 1 and 2. Can we make money or save money, or can we be more efficient? But there are 2 underlying, and happiness is usually a bit more up there. People will actually talk about, we want to have more satisfaction, lifetime value of a customer, so therefore they're more happy with working with us. Or maybe we don't want our teams to be happy and we work well and think about our culture. But the one that we don't talk about, that we have to observe, is status. And that can be the underlying one that actually makes it incredibly hard to deal with a person or a part of the organization. Or sometimes the status of a group or an organization are actually so low that actually they're sitting there going, I can't get anything done because we're just considered a cost center. When I look at status, this is the one where we have to understand the person and observe the person and understand where they're coming from to understand how it's going to affect them. So let me tell you a little story of someone who I did some coaching with a number of years ago now. She was working for a large e-commerce marketplace, and she was going to be working in a new department where they had invested a large amount of money, millions of dollars. And she was going to be probably one of the first designers working in there. And because this was a large marketplace, they had an understanding of things like information architecture in taxonomies and ontologies, because everything needs to be classified. But design was still very much seen as a delivery focus. You will create prototypes, you will create these, as opposed to something that is more design thinking. I don't particularly like design thinking as a term, but something that is actually creative in thinking about the organization. And she said, how do I tell him? How do I tell him that I do something different? At the end of the hour and a half that she and I were working together, she turned to me and went, oh, I've got to understand him, don't I? I said, yeah. This guy who's been given millions of dollars to set up this new department, what does he want to do? And she says he wants to make sure that he's used the money correctly, that it actually does something to move the organization further, but he's afraid he's going to fail. That's a status thing. I want to be seen as, you've invested all of this time and money and I'm going to be leading this. What if I fail? So we talked about her understanding status for this person, which says, how do you adjust what you're going to be offering to this person to make sure that this person is successful? And she said, oh, I don't need to tell him anything, do I? I went, no. This is about you understanding him and then saying, how can I help you? And it's about him, not the rest of the team. Him be successful. Status is the one that you can't understand in one meeting. You might, I mean, if they're very obvious about it, you might get it. And there have been people where my spidey senses have gone, ooh, this is the person who's going to be a problem. because of status. But a lot of the time you only start to pick up the status once you have had more conversations with them. So they may be people who are seen as the person who delivers and who makes the decisions. My status is I deliver, I make the decisions, I do what needs to be done, and therefore I'm more important. Perhaps it is more important because of their place, not necessarily the products or the content on the navigation. We are first. We're the ones who make the most money. I'm the one who makes the decisions because it's my decision. There's so much, I'm not going to say arrogance, that you could call it arrogance about status, but I think the status also has a lot of fear in there as well. Status is not generous. If people are generous, they're not as worried about their status because they are ready to be with others. There are some who will have great status because of their generosity, and there's some who perceive great status because of what they keep within themselves. And that is therefore, we're talking about the control of the narrative. And for those of you who have ever done navigation before, have you ever seen the knives come out when navigation redesign appears? Oh my God. I've been doing navigation redesigns, creations and redesigns for over 25 years. And it still hasn't changed. There's still people going, that's my area. I want to call it this. Why aren't I on the top? Why has this gone down here? I want to make the decision. You don't make the decision. I had a memory of, I was working in the UK and I was working for Bristol City Council. And the guy who was the PM, who was a really fantastic project manager, kept us in line. I was working for a consultancy at that time. And I turned to him and said, I'm going to print out all of these and I'm going to invite people to come. And it was the best thing I ever did because all of these people from across the council came into this room and said, I need to be here. This is what I need to do. And we sat down and I had pencils and we drew on it. Sometimes we made changes. Sometimes it went back to reverted to what it was before. But they got heard when they came in going, I need to keep my status and I need to keep my stuff. I've got to be as important as I was. My stuff needs to be there. So this is the politics element, which is how on earth do we go through this? Because none of this, as we all described it, looking at those 2017 designs from JB Hi-Fi, it's not about the user. It's about the status of the people and them being seen as important because their bit's there. And this is a problem because no one usually owns the IA as a whole. And it comes up more and more, no one owns the information architecture. Which brings me to governance. So I want to talk about this little model about high product focus and so IA capability and product focus. And this, I think, is one of the aspects of saying, what do we do if no one owns the information architecture? At the lot which says low IA capability and low product focus, no one owns the products or the capability. And this is actually an opportunity for someone to come in and grab it. But it really says the IA has been developing organically, and someone has created a template and someone just fills it in. If we talk about an organization which is high product focus and low IA capability, you will find that the IA products, and when I'm defining IA products, I am talking about search and navigation and classification and indices and product data All of those products are powered by data only. So it's a high product focus. Someone will own the products, but it's not particularly understood of the nuances of the users or understanding what the capability will be. We're basically saying it's data only. This is where I've been in organizations and they turn and say, we want to make everything flat, because flat means that people will only click on two things. Brings back my joy of the 3 clicks conversation with Jacob Nielsen from early 2000s. Please get rid of that. I have seen people, in particular in a drop-down nav in mobile nav, they'll go bang, 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 bang. Really easy, really quickly, if they can just see how it works. Don't worry about the 3 clicks. At the bottom right-hand corner, we have an IA guild. Usage, yeah, that's what I'm saying, parallel, yeah, usage metrics only. If we look at the IA guild actually has the least power of all of these. Because what you're saying, and this is exactly the same thing of accessibility, which is we will bring a community of people together. They will have no power, but hopefully by some sort of soft influence, the IA will magically all work. And the one that I like the best, and very, very few organizations do this, is the IA products managed by people with high IA capability. That is why when I have been a product manager, I have been the product manager in charge of data products and search and nav and product data, and that's program data, that's what I did at the BBC. That's what I have managed as a product manager with a high IA capability. And that means that people who understand the users, as well as how to actually create and manage the products together, you'll have successful products there. Yeah. So when someone turns to me and says, we'll have a guild, I die a little inside, because I know that the IA will then end up being powered by data only. So what does all this mean about politics? If you have explicit governance and ownership, then at least someone has responsibility for the IA. At least someone. Doesn't mean it always works, but at least someone has responsibility. And if it's not, it's about influence. And this is where the guilds come in, which is about influence. You can do as much training as you want, but especially in those organizations when you have a guild, which means that the majority of them are being product organizations. Those product organizations, product is king. And therefore, anything that a user experience team or information architects or content strategists are trying to do will be about soft skills and influence. And of course, that's politics. So the way that I think about it is you have to get into this trust mode. And a lot of the time we don't have enough time with information architecture to get to trust mode so that you can influence. And this is all about value. Now, I can say as a consultant working, if I think about Santander, which is a big Spanish bank based, and I was working with the UK arm, to build trust, I had to listen to them, in particular the marketing team's need for life events or the equivalent of CAN, and say to them, I understand what you're doing. I understand where you're coming from. Let me develop, you need to develop trust in me. And so I'm going to listen to you. And then I'm going to bring as much of my user research in to understand and balance this so that you can see what's going to be the most important. For Santander, who were highly at that point in time call center focused, it was about how do we get them to the right call center? How do we get them on the phone as quickly as possible? And so if I could do that and see that people could find stuff and then get them into that call center so that they could sell the products, they trusted me. And that's how I moved into the influence and the advocacy world. So what do we do when it comes to us and politics? So here's a little process that I have. We used to call it the squid. We turn it on its side. We used to turn the squid of an IA process. Whereas you bring in the SEO, the customer, the business, the technology requirements. Very simply, you design the IA. You know, that takes longer than just that little circle. You go and review, you do your user testing, and that could happen multiple times. You prototype an A/B test. Then you go in, and usually then you apply to the rest of the navigation and probably go in and do some more A/B testing in there. You build the technology at the same time and then go into live. Very simple process. We have to bring in a full stakeholder management, because at the moment it turns up in SEO, customer, business, technology. You'll have stakeholders in all of these. And what we're doing in here is saying, if I'm dealing with the politics, this is not just we're going to do a stand-up or a meeting once a week. This is, we spend time, ongoing time with these people. So the project, you may start with one-on-ones and then do workshops about ownership and governance, and then review with each area. And then as you go through this process, you review again and hopefully then agree on a governance, and then you apply the governance model. Yeah, very step-by-steppy. But as you can see, we have this ongoing, the one-to-ones, the one-on-ones all of the time. Because at every single point in time, if we're talking about ownership, brand, and status, they will rear their ugly heads every time they see it. So this is a change management project. This is a conversation that we have to identify who these people are and continue these conversations over and over and over again. I have worked in places as both a consultant and internally, where I have, especially earlier on in my time, where we have done one-on-ones early on and then thought, I've got the handle on this person. And as we move lower through this process, they have derailed the project. And the aim is that we have built this to a trust level. So they understand the value to them, whether it's from an ownership, which is I own this section, or status. If I give this up, what will this mean? So that you hear that, and you deal with it, and you make sure that they are seeing the value of what we're doing to them and their KPIs, or them and their product. So the politics is just this other piece of work that we need to do. And so navigation is one of the aspects where we need to look at it and go, who are we doing this for? And it's the users, but it's also the organization, and how do we work with them? So we have about 5 minutes for questions, and then I know Angus has some stuff that he needs to actually finish up with as well. So let me stop the share.
Thank you so much, Mags. So yes, we do have a few minutes for questions. So if you have a question, feel free to either type it into the chat or put your hand up if you'd like to ask it out loud. We certainly got lots of wonderful comments as you were talking, Mags. So I think people, especially the section on status, really resonated with people.
Hi, it's Elle here. I had a question for
yes,
you, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
I just love that presentation so much. Thank you. The 25 billion years as opposed to 25 years of experience just smashes through my screen. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. When I'm doing IA, I reckon the way I tell myself is I'm doing 50% the taxonomic stuff and 50% the sell. One of the things that I really loved about your talk is you really emphasizing the strategies about that specific, the set of techniques you have. But I guess I'm looking for advice on, it might be, I think, all the things that you said, the thing that resonated with me is this kind of sense of ownership. And if we come in and say, you're not owning that anymore, that can feel really, really difficult for people. And that fear that you mentioned really resonated again. Do you have any advice on how you might tactically manage that? And you were talking about putting the time in, but is there any?
Yeah, and I think this comes down to ownership is two elements. If I'll take JB Hi-Fi as an example. Ownership was each of the buyers owned a section, and the section reflected them. And then they actually had people who were managing it for them on the actual detail that we changed that label level. So there was, for me, when I look at that, I look at saying to them, we're going to be doing this and it's going to help you meet your goals. But I also trust you that you will do what's best. And my aim is to help you do that. So the ownership for, I can give you a screen. Well, it's been Laureen was asking for screenshots. Can give you a screenshot later. I think this is definitely a trust bit. For me, when I was doing the JB Hi-Fi one, I created headphones and speakers as a separate section. It wasn't owned by anyone in particular because it was an aggregate of everyone else. So my job was to say to all of these people who felt the ownership of the speakers, which is your area will be represented. You will have an ability to edit it and make sure that it is there and it represents your group. But our first process now is to make sure that it works for the end user. So ownership's so hard, Elle, and I'm not quite sure if it answers your question, but it was definitely the twofold, because the user experience team that I was working with turned and said, how can we trust them to do the right thing? And I said, well, if I've brought them through this process, they don't want to derail this because it's so immediate to senior management. The senior management sees it, goes, okay, yes. And also I want them to feel as if they can still make the changes they need to. My interesting one was the headphones and speakers guy who was doing some of this turned and said, actually, Google is the most important partner in all of this when it comes to speakers. They're more important than Amazon. They are more important than Apple. They are our most important. And so me and the guy who was actually had the editing rights to that section sat down with him and said, okay, let's work through with you. I want them to be the highest priority. I want them to be here. I want them to be there. And we actually talked him down from that. But we listened to him and said, how do we make sure that that is represented and your ownership and your status and the things that you need to do for your customers, and your customers are Google, not your customers being people buying it. How do we make sure? So it's that ongoing negotiation, which says, we're going to do our best for you. We know you own it, and we will sit down. And we sat down and we drew it out. Me and my wireframes, we drew it out and we worked through it together when he said, and I said, okay, this is how we can do it. This is how we can make sure that Google is represented in there very explicitly. And we make it the top one, but we've still got to make sure from the end users that we don't get rid of Apple and Amazon as well. Because guess what? They're probably looking for a bit of those as well. So that's how I did it when it came to negotiation. It's usually a one-on-one.
Thanks, Mags. It's so valuable to hear those real life. It's never perfect in real life, is it?
No.
So I think we have about a minute. If you can give a really quick answer to S. Donohoe, if you have one,
Yep.
would you say the stakeholder management and governance process is a parallel process to the IA, or are they inseparable?
So they are inseparable, but they are parallel. So the first one that I did it really explicitly was a company called Debenhams. Debenhams doesn't exist really any longer. It's a big department store in the UK, and during COVID it disappeared because rent. And we very explicitly turned and said, governance is going to be our problem. So let's address this. And that's one of the reasons of the workshops, etc. We went through with every single department separately, and then I brought them together to actually talk about what each of those needs. And I presented an affinity diagram of what each different department was doing and the themes that were coming through. So I did it very definitely as a governance process. I think we still failed because we had at the end, we wanted to hire an information architect who owned it, but there were very few IAs, as Elle and I could say, there are very few IAs in the world, and that it was very hard to find someone who had enough gravitas to be able to manage it. And that's one of my problems, is that I go in and have enough gravitas to do this work and to have these conversations, and usually then organizations hire someone a little bit more junior, and it falls apart because they don't have the gravitas to actually manage it moving forward. So if I say, if you want to move this forward, you have to hire someone with a bit of heft in there, in what they can do.
If I could
Absolutely.
follow up. Oh, sorry. I'm wondering if two different people could handle, like if someone could manage the governance process, if a UX designer is charged with the IA and taxonomy process.
I think you do find that more introverted technical people do taxonomies and IAs, and I will admit that I am on the extrovert side, one of the rare UXers who's extroverted. And I think, yes, that there could be definitely a split, and you could possibly make more of a UX lead being the person who is responsible if they have that type of skill set.
Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mags, and thanks for those questions. So I think that's been an amazing talk, and I actually wonder how many of the talks for IA Day would have even mentioned governance or working with stakeholders. I suspect we might be one of the few. So that's been amazing, and yeah, thanks again for being with us, Mags. I do have a couple of announcements to make about the meetup and a couple of other things. If you have anything you'd like to announce, please pop it in the chat or put your hand up. If you need to go, I realise we're getting close to 1 o'clock. Need to go, that's absolutely fine, of course. Thank you very much for being here. But yeah, I would just like to share, first of all, a little bit of news about the meetup. So apologies to those of you who aren't regular members of the meetup. This is just a little bit of housekeeping. We, as many of you know, we started as 2 meetups, one in Melbourne and one in Canberra. This was pre-COVID, and we were meeting in person. So We Are Content Strategy was our Melbourne meetup. Canberra Content Strategy meetup was our Canberra meetup. And then when COVID happened, we pretty much joined the 2 meetups and started running them as online meetups. And on meetup.com, we've maintained the 2 groups, and we've just been advertising the events separately for the 2 groups. That's a less than ideal way of doing things for various reasons. So what we've decided to do is to consolidate on a single group. And that is going to be We Are Content Strategy, because obviously because it doesn't have a place name. So we're going to be basically advertising events to a single group, which will be called We Are Content Strategy and Design, because another thing that's changed is that we probably have as many talks about content design as we do about content strategy. Now, what that means for those of you who are members of the Canberra group, but not We Are Content Strategy, unfortunately, Meetup, one of the many frustrations with meetup.com, and don't get me started on that platform, one of the many frustrations with them is that there's no way of merging 2 groups. So unfortunately for the Canberra people, we are going to have to ask you to manually join the We Are Content Strategy Meetup if you want to keep hearing about our events. I've created just a redirect from our website, because once we change the name, I'm not actually sure what the URL of the page is going to be. So if you just visit that URL, make sure you're signed up to the Melbourne to the We Are Content Strategy meetup. I will also be sending out an email to people who are on that Canberra meetup, just to make sure we don't miss anyone there. And that's not to say we'll never do an in-person event again. But for the time being, we're concentrating on our online meetups. If you'd like to go and chat to people in real life and go to an actual meetup where there's things to drink and people to talk to, Elle Geraghty, who's here today, runs an amazing meetup in Sydney, which is worth, to be honest, worth a trip to Sydney just to go to one of Elle's meetups. So that's a bit about the meetup, and we'll have a few other announcements to make later on. We actually have our speakers lined up for the next 2 meetups. So in March, we're going to have our good friend Zoe Rose talking about accessibility for bad guys. I won't say too much about that topic. I'll just let you be intrigued by that. And then on the 24th of March, we'll be having our other good friend Mary Sabatkowski talking about experience maps, which is a sort of concept that she has developed that she uses in her own practice that we think is going to be really interesting to people working on content. We're really keen to get have a mix of the international speakers who we've had a lot in the past with a few more Australian speakers, and also people who might not have a lot of experience speaking. So if you feel like you have something to say and you'd like to speak at a meetup, please do get in touch. Just a bit about the training that we offer through Weave. We have a couple of courses coming up. One is our course on user research for content designers, which we're really excited to be running next week. There are still tickets available for that. So if you happen to have Tuesday and Wednesday free, we've had great response. It's going to be a wonderful group, and we're going to have a great time. We also have the Content Design London course on advanced content design coming up on the 14th to 15th of March, and you can see all the details on our website. Did anyone else have anything they would like to announce? No? Okay. So World IA Day 2025 is going to be on the 8th of March. I think it's gone brilliantly today, so we may well apply to have another event in Australia, but even if we don't, there will be events all over the world for that. And I will just put up that slide, that gift bag slide again, just in case anyone didn't manage to grab the URL or the QR code. And feel free to stick around and chat, but that is the formal part of the day. So thank you so much for coming. Thanks once again to Mags, sorry. Oh, whoops. My colleagues can confirm how bad I am with names. So thanks so much to Mags. And yeah, Mags has left some details in the chat about where you can get in contact with her as well. I had a question, if you don't mind sticking around for a minute, Mags.
I don't. No, I'm here.
So one of the things, I think one of the sort of naive things that we're often told as designers is, well, it's all okay because your IA decisions are going to be backed up by data and you'll actually have the testing results to show people. And there's almost this expectation that once you show your tree testing to stakeholders and say, oh, look, this tested really well, so all your concerns are void. And that's obviously not what happens in real life. And I feel like that was a sort of implicit in your talk, that it takes more than data to actually convince a stakeholder.
It does. I think this is the status one, which is when we look at the values of, making money or saving time, those are the 2 ones that usually our tree testing is focusing on, which says, or even the happiness of our customers, which says, okay, they could find this stuff, we can see it's efficient, we can see it's effective, but we still have a group of people who sit there and go, it's all about me, and I actually have enough power to stop it. I think that's the bit where we have to be really effective, which is, yes, of course we've got that, but actually someone is going to say, you've hurt my feelings, you've hurt what I need from this, and I'm still have the power to change this, or I have the power to stop you doing this. And that is where, everything that is, how was I going to say it? Everything that is backed by data and backed by the users, sometimes even then, you'll have business who'll go, nope, we want to do it this way, which is probably why CAN was on the Commonwealth Bank site for such a long time.
Yeah. Well, we've all probably got our own examples of CAN, don't we? It's funny you mentioned life events, because I think McGee had experience with that at another, well, probably shouldn't mention the
I was
bank,
at
another Big Four bank.
Yeah, I was at a competitive bank at the same time,
Oh,
having exactly that conversation, and yeah.
Yeah.
But something I just wanted to mention, that I just think I love how you've brought this implicit problem that we always have when we're doing information architecture work, which is that it is so much about people and it's so much about governance. But when we talk about IA and teaching IA and learning IA, we never talk about that. Even though, and I love the fact that you've surfaced it at the same level of importance as that work, because it does, and we've had it happen where you've done all this work on an IA and then it just goes pear-shaped at the very end when it goes through the approval process, and yeah, I just think it's so great. What a great talk. Thank you.
My pleasure. I have someone who I've been working with over the last year had a contractual problem when it came to classification, which was some people, so it was a high status products, and some of them didn't would say they could only be in one category and did not want to be next to brands in another category, and they wrote it into the actual contracts.
Wow.
So we had to sit there and say, how on earth do we provide access when some brands are here and some brands are there, but no user knows the difference? And then we talked then about how do we provide different access points based on the facets of the content and the properties of the content, as opposed to the primary categorization.
What?
It was just like, whoa, and that they kept getting caught on these three primary categories, and we knew that the users didn't know the middle one, that they didn't know the middle one, they didn't use it, they were never going to use it, but it was something that was written into categories that these people could not be together. And so that was the thing that we had to work through, and it was a real sticking point with the people I was working with, because they were sitting there going, but it's in the contract. I'm going, okay, if it's in the contract, we're going to have to deal with it in that way. Let's work out other access points. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's been fabulous. Thank
So
you for
good.
that, Mags. I think we should let everyone go. But
All right.
I know we could keep talking for hours though.
we could.
Well,
And just sharing our trauma.
Book in half an hour, we can do IA therapy.
I love it. We should definitely do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Lovely.
Wonderful. Okay, thanks everyone. Yeah, have a
Thank
wonderful
you.
day. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Mags.
Yeah, thank you, Mags. That was so good.